Hello, everyone, and welcome to In the Studio. My name is Professor Lisa Beebe, and I'm in the music department at Cosumnes River College. Today, I am joined by a very special co-host. Welcome, Gabriel Riviera. Gabriel is the instructional assistant in the music department at CRC, also a composer. You should check out his In the Studio talk from fall
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 2021.
2021. Yeah, time is still wibbly wobbly.
Hmm.
But yeah, welcome so much, Gabriel. It's
Thank
wonderful to
you.
co-host.
I'm happy to be here.
Like, yeah,
Co-hosting. It's gonna be cool. We have a
coming up
very,
for the
very good guest.
yeah, we have an awesome guest today. I'm super excited. Join us in a warm CRC music in the studio. Welcome for composer Zach Watkins. Yay! Thanks so much for joining us. Zach is a composer, producer, poet, musician, and professor at CRC. Some of you may have taken classes with Zach before, and I see already in the chat a shout out from a student. Professor Watkins is brilliant and one of my favorite professors. Awesome. Clear, strong endorsement right from the get-go. Thank you so much for joining us today, Zach.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. Great to see both of you, and just excited to be here and to talk and to share and about this wonderful love that we all have for our art.
Yeah, I love that introduction. That is perfect.
Yeah.
So maybe we can kind of start at the beginning, if that's okay. And Zach, maybe you could tell us a little bit about, you know, what drew you to music? What was there a specific event or maybe an activity that you were involved in early in life that kind of led you down this glorious path that is being a
Yeah,
music professor?
sure. Um, I was the kid who was always off playing piano by himself. And that's mostly what I remember from childhood, actually, is just I loved just sitting there and sometimes I would be lost in whatever it was that the teachers had me practicing. Sometimes I would be trying to make up my own songs. Sometimes I was busy pretending to be Billy Joel in front of thousands of people, you know. And as time went by, it just became clearer and clearer that this was what I loved and this was what I wanted to do with my life. And I had a bit of a roundabout path to it. I took my bachelor's in composition and then ended up with one of those real jobs and kept music on the side for a long time. And eventually, about 10 years ago, went back to school and got my master's in comp and now have been doing it full time since.
That's awesome.
That's
Where did you do your master's in composition?
Just over at CSUS.
Okay, awesome. So a shout out to Sac State.
They were very good to me.
That's awesome. And how did you come to be a professor at CRC?
Through Professor Erickson, we were on a program together, actually. I had a piece premiering, as did he, and actually a wonderful program put on by pianist Jennifer Reason and soprano Carrie Hennessy. And I heard his music, he heard mine, and we talked afterwards and just instantly had a mutual wonderful love fest going on and have been friends and colleagues ever since. And he brought me on board when the opportunity arose.
That's awesome. And a shout out to Professor Erickson, who couldn't join us today due to a last minute emergency. But we thank him so much for bringing you to
mm-hmm.
CRC, Zach, so we could know you and work with you. Yeah. So I could keep asking questions, but I'm going to give you a turn.
Okay, okay. Um, so at what point, I'm gonna go a little bit back before your undergrad in composition. So what made you, because you started as a pianist, right? What made you go into composition and maybe not go as a pianist? Did you always had that bug that you want to create music and you like practicing, but creating was so much more fulfilling? How did that come about?
Well, first off, who told you that I liked practicing?
I don't know. That's why I chose composition myself. I don't like practicing.
No, it's a really good question because I think you touch on something that most composers can relate to is at some point you get bit by this bug where it just, you want to make the music yourself. For me, I tend to think of it, and I don't know how far back this thought goes, but I always felt like I wanted to write the kind of music that I wished was out there to listen to. And that's something that has taken different shapes over the years. One of the things we'll talk about today, of course, is that I work in lots of different genres. Um, but when I was younger, it was just about, maybe I was frustrated with my own classical studies, and and my piano teachers tried to give me pop music to play to try and keep me interested. But just as time went by, all I really wanted to do, well, not all, but more than be a pianist, was to be writing the music. And then that branches out, of course, to small ensembles and working with voice and all of that other stuff.
Okay. That's awesome.
Mhm. So you mentioned working in different genres. So maybe this would be a great time to segue. What are some of your recent projects? What are some of the compositions you've been absorbed with lately?
Sure. Well, we'll talk, I'm sure, about the Lo-Fi project, the Old Man Z stuff today. I'm currently working on a very small chamber piece that I hope will be able to get out there next year. I do producing for, I work with a local hip hop artist, and I write beats there, record spoken word stuff, and there's no one thing that stands up. It's just all these different little things happening all at the same time, and I never know what's going to come at me, but it makes it exciting.
Yeah, that's cool. It's always exciting to meet, for me to meet with musicians who feel drawn to different genres and don't necessarily feel locked in to a certain style of music. I know in my own music education for a really long time, I felt like, there was only one way to be a musician, right? And it's like, well, I play viola and this is the music I'm going to play. And these are the things I'm going to study. And then eventually, realizing that wasn't true. And that for me, what is so great about being a musician is you get to follow the questions that excite you. Right? And yeah, I mean, how do you feel? This is an esoteric question, but like, sort of what guides your creative process? Like, do you hear something and then you're inspired to explore more? Maybe it's through conversations, or you mentioned earlier, creating the kind of music that you want to be listening to. Kind of what sparks your creativity and your excitement?
Sure. And this question is going to be a different answer for everybody, you know, because everybody creates differently. For me, it comes from this kind of never-ending stream of possibilities always running through the mind. And or maybe I'm sitting at the piano and I'm just improvising for a while, or maybe I am listening to music that I haven't heard before. Anyway, whichever it is that's the input that's happening, an idea kind of strikes me. And I hear this little tiny snippet, and I have learned to recognize the potential within that idea. And so I'm sitting at the piano, improvising, maybe playing around with jazz chords, and I come up with like a little motive and say, oh, I can write a 15-minute piano piece out of that. Just it's I mean, I don't know in that moment what it's all going to sound like or what it's going to be, but like when you get enough experience in creating, you begin to recognize the potential of a musical idea.
Mm.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And it does take a lot of time to be able to hear that little snippet and know its potential, its value. Um, it's taken me a few years to get that, but and I wouldn't say I still need to get better at it. Sometimes I would just keep going and going, and then by the time I finished, like, oh, I should have used that, but it's good that you mentioned it, for future composers, you know, to recognize and be aware that sometimes a little teeny bitty thing, like you say, has the potential to create 15 minutes of music, 15 minutes piano piece, or yeah. So
It's also
yeah.
really interesting for me too, because I am not a composer and I don't even know if I've ever really composed more than a few measures of music at a time. And even though I now know and love many composers, to me, composition is still kind of this esoteric magic thing. um, where I'm like, wow, how do you go from getting an idea, this spark in your mind, and then turning it into this, fully fleshed out piece. And I imagine it's probably a little bit like Olympic figure skating, which is when you see the performance and everything looks so perfect and graceful, you're not seeing the hours of struggle and practice that are going into it.
It's true. It's so true. But that same thing is true of anybody who's working in music professionally. You go to a concert and you see a master, performer, and they just let out this monster of a performance. And how many people in the audience realize that no, they have been doing this for 8, 10 hours a day for at least how many months? I mean, that's the nature of a performance, of an art. You just all the preparation and hey, look at this little amazing thing. Oh, you're so talented. How did you do that?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, wow. Maybe now is a good time to dive into one of those nuggets of wow, how did you do this? Maybe we could talk a little bit about your lo-fi album. And before we kind of dive into that, maybe you could kind of explain us what lo-fi is.
Yeah, sure. So lo-fi is kind of a subgenre. I think of it as a blend between ambient and instrumental hip hop, and it's very very relaxing. Something to maybe go to sleep to or just study to, and but if I were to just talk about it technically, I like to describe it in terms of it's an intentionally degraded sound. Okay, so
Mm.
this is a genre of music that comes about as a reaction to the way studio technology has progressed, and we've been able to have more and better increased, perfectionism, especially in the home studio environment. And so this is a pushback against that, where you're making music that is intentionally not sounding great. And so it's beat construction, it's sample construction, just like you would do in a lot of hip hop, except that whereas in hip hop, one of the things that you tend to focus on is making sure that you have a nice clean sample. If with lo-fi, it's no, you want it as dirty as possible. The dirtier the better. What I did for this particular project, though, is I didn't pull samples. I didn't pull vinyl samples. I actually wrote music and I brought in session players and then I chopped that up and then I degraded the sample and added in that grit and the tape effects and stuff like that. And then I chopped that up into loops, and that's how I made the record.
Nice.
That's so cool. So you essentially, rather than sampling other artists, you made your own samples, you made your own pieces, and then use those as samples. And when you're talking about degrading the audio or making it dirty, what does that mean? Maybe for folks who don't have as much experience with digital
Yeah,
production.
sure. So think of it as you find an old vinyl record and you put it on, and it's the grooves of it's been played many times, and so it doesn't play back with as much dynamic response, and it's old and it's dusty, and so there's lots of pops and crackles and hiss, and you're playing it on an old turntable, and the needle is just really terrible, and so it picks up a much more limited frequency response. And so one of the things about studio production these days is that you're able to achieve all of those effects artificially. I mean, you have to do it the right way, obviously,
Yeah.
but you can recreate that sound.
Wow. It's interesting. It's almost like when people buy jeans and then cut holes in them.
But you're right. But no, that's a really good point. That's a
Yeah.
great analogy.
And it's so cool, when you were talking about how we've come so far in terms of the things we can do with digital production, even at home, right? At our home workstations, things like GarageBand or Audacity or Pro Tools, that now there's kind of this pushback against a perfect sound, right? And we talk about this sometimes in my classes, like, is it better to be perfect or to sound real or authentic. And what does that mean? And this is a theme that comes up all the time in music, and especially over the past few decades, you know, and how like punk music in a lot of ways was a reaction towards this slick production value of the 1980s and MTV and big hair and all that good stuff. And then when I think of punk music and I think of lo-fi, it's kind of, you know, a similar approach and a similar reaction, but in very different ways, like totally different sonic effects. Yeah, so that's really, really cool.
I completely agree. That's a totally valid comparison. And I think that there's another component there that doesn't get talked about often enough, but like there's a social values aspect there
Mm.
that's also similarly in sync, I think.
In terms of like having a more authentic or human sound because it's not as, you know,
Right, as
corporate.
opposed to
Mm.
as opposed to a corporate sound, you know,
Mm.
it's
Yeah.
not the suits dictating your music must be XYZ and we're gonna send it out to, you know, all the suburbs and all this other stuff. It's like, no, you know, I'm gonna make the music that I want to make. And it's not for people like you, it's for people like me. You know,
Mm.
there's that kind of attitude that's there, that's a part of it.
Cool. So how did you come then to come to lo-fi? Was it music that you had already been listening to and enjoying, and then decided to make an album? Was it something you've been thinking about for a long time?
Oh, I don't know. It's and you know, I think all of us have slightly fuzzy memories once the pandemic set in.
Yeah.
Um, but I have long had a habit of trying to listen to as many different types of musics as possible, you know, and my students can tell you, you know, like they'll walk into a class and they have no idea what they're about to, you know, what they're hearing on the way in. And sometimes it's not even anything that I have ever heard before. It's something that I will have heard about and I just dial it right in. We have a listen. And that's how I found lo-fi, although this is, you know, a few years back now. And and the moment I heard this sound, I just fell in love with it. There was something so, I don't know, it just, I like ambient, and obviously I've worked a lot of, you know, with hip hop and I've played shows and stuff like that. But I heard this sound and it tickles my soul. It like it
Mm.
really, you know, I just really grooving on it. And then the pandemic hit, and I said, oh, I'm not going to be getting any commissions for a while, you
Mm.
know. And so this was kind of my way of still continuing to make music, still
Mm.
continuing to work on a project. And I reached out to some of my close friends and asked them if they wanted to be involved, and some were and some weren't, and it depended on where we were and how bad things were and whether we could gather and all of that stuff. So but most of it is what I was able to do from the home studio.
Mm.
And it was, yeah, so it is my pandemic passion project, if you will.
Okay.
Cool. Do you want to listen? Maybe we should listen to a
Yeah.
snippet. Yeah.
Definitely.
So, is there a particular piece you want to start with?
No, you got the controls. Bring it
Okay.
out.
Okay. So
Yeah, DJ Gabe in the house.
yeah. So we're gonna start with "Fire All Around," featuring Carrie Ann Estrada and Trevor Hall, which I think Trevor is actually here with us as an attendee. Hi, Trevor.
That's awesome.
That was really awesome.
Definitely in the zone for a second there. And since Trevor is here, why don't we bring him on the mic so that Trevor can share a little bit about working on this album. Hi, Trevor.
Hey,
Hello,
Trevor.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
How's it
Hi.
going, dude?
It's going great. It's so cool to be here and it's awesome to hear that. Yeah. So I guess I'll just start with Zach, we met at Sac State. My wife, well, my now wife, Carrie Ann Estrada, who is the trombone player. We met Zach, I believe it was oh gosh, this is how long it's been, Zach. What year was it when we actually, was it 14 or 15?
That sounds about right. Somewhere in there, because I had a piece that a mutual friend recommended the two of you to play on. I think that's how we all met.
Right. Oh my gosh, that's right. And yeah, so we got to know Zach very well from then, and then during the pandemic when I'm a gigging full-time player slash teacher, so when there was nothing to do, once Zach reached out to us, we were instantly like, yes, yes, absolutely. And we trust him completely with not just his composition, because his were just, what I love about your writing is it's groovy. And I love to groove when I play. And how it worked was we came in, it had been years since I've been on a recording or done any kind of recording, but he just said, bring any instrument you want. So I brought just a plethora of hand drums. We tested out the sounds. And what you heard on that recording was the cajon, which is, most people recognize it. It looks like a box, but it's not a box, which is a little plug-in for another solo that Zach wrote for me called "This Is Not a Box," written for solo cajon, which was premiered for my teacher at Sac State, Dan Kennedy, when he retired. So yeah, I just played a cajon. We found some sounds that we liked, and essentially there was that track that he played, and he let me listen to it, and then he said, "All right, now just play what you feel." And then eventually what it turned into was he then put on the producer hat, which is try this. How about try this? But overall, he kind of let us just do our thing. And it's such a cool process to work in that aspect. And I would always be happy to do it again. So
You guys were amazing, and it was such a pleasure to have you. I mean, this is what we do as musicians. You know, we work with each other and we groove off of each other, and we get ideas from each other, and it's such a communal aspect. And the one drawback that I have a little bit to being a composer is that so much of the work is done by myself, and so to have y'all in there and to work together creatively, it was awesome, especially during the pandemic when we weren't getting very much of that.
exactly. Yeah. And two, it was yeah, for my wife, that was her first time ever in that kind of setting. And it was so funny because she was so nervous. And if you've met her, she is so the most confident person I know. She's a band director. She's been playing trombone since high school, and she's just this bright, shining presence. But to have her feel so nervous and I don't know what I'm doing, but Zach the whole time was just, what are you talking about? You know what to do.
Right.
Come on,
Yeah.
just play. So it was so heartwarming to see that and just be a part of it too. And she absolutely loved it. And of course, we're always down to do anything that Zach asks us to do. So,
So good to hear your voice, Trevor.
and it's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you for being our surprise guest.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
Really awesome fun fact. That track off of that one that we just heard, that's actually ended up being the most played track off of the album. So
No
if you
way.
Oh,
Yeah. So,
Awesome.
see, you guys rock.
And that, kind of, I'm hearing a couple different themes already so far in our talk. And one is, that so much of our work as musicians and our, what sparks our creativity is meeting other musicians and collaborating with each other. And I hate the term networking because I'm a bit of a socially anxious person, and it makes me like, oh, networking, I have to talk to new people. My palms are sweaty already. But networking can also be like meeting people who have the same passions and values as you do and getting inspiration from them. And then sometimes that then, can create opportunities, right? Whether that's a job or collaborating on an album or a project. And especially in the pandemic when we either weren't able to do that or we had to come up with new ways to do that, was really challenging. And especially, everybody in the world was having to get out of their comfort zone. And for musicians, definitely. And I think that, folks can be super confident in what they do, but then when you're asked to do it a little differently, right? Go in the studio and work on an album, that can be really intimidating. So there's something to be said for having that courage to keep creating during the pandemic.
Yeah, and I really like your rephrase there of networking, because you're right. Networking has that term has such a sterile connotation, and you're absolutely right. It's just working with people who you have common values with.
That's less scary, I think.
Agreed.
Yeah. So we have a question from Jewel. Thanks for asking, Jewel. So Jewel mentioned that you were inspired to make your lo-fi album, kind of not necessarily in response to the pandemic, but seeing the pandemic as an opportunity to work on this project, or this project a way to keep creating despite the circumstances. What were some of your other inspirations, specifically for the song Set Fire All Around?
Oh, wow. This is a great question. Everybody wants to know where the composers get their ideas from.
We're very curious.
Yeah, and I unfortunately I have to be a bit nebulous here, because so much of my process is very, very intuitive. And I have my certain music that I like to listen to, my certain artists that I like to listen to, but I knew that if I did too much of listening to what I'm used to, then I wouldn't be getting the sound I needed for this record, right? Because then those are the sounds that are going to be in my heads, and so my music that I'm writing is going to reflect that. And so something that I learned as a composer is that if you are trying to write in a particular style, you go and you listen to that. And I don't know if you ever had to do this, but like, write a Mozart sonata. It's like, okay, so you sit down and you listen to a whole bunch of Mozart and you analyze the way the music works.
Or write a fugue, like in the style of Bach. That's
right. Exactly. And so what I did to get inspired for this record was I sat down with my Spotify and I just listened to nothing but lo-fi, just over and over again. And when a good track would come along, I'd heart it. And then I built up kind of this playlist of stuff that I felt particularly drawn to. And then I stopped with the fishing and the broad search. And then I just listened to that. I think I ended up with something about 2 hours long. And I just kind of listened to that over and over again. And that's when the deconstruction process is like, okay, so what's happening in this beat here? Okay, what are they doing with that kick sound over there? Okay, that is like a keys loop that's lasting 3 bars instead of 4. It's figuring out all the pieces in there, and then that's where the inspiration comes from.
Oh, I like that. It's like, letting your ears, what was it, that those old Yellow Pages commercials, or it was like, let your fingers do the walking. I'm dating myself here. This is like letting your ears do the walking. I love that. And then like exploring and then getting down to like, okay, let me build my toolbox. Like, here are the types of sounds, and that's cool.
Yeah. And a fun process too. That was the best part of it. It's like, I'm just doing nothing but listening to great music the whole time.
And you've basically written a dissertation now about lo-fi, analyzing all these pieces.
Somebody called Bloomington.
Yeah, right. I was gonna say, that sounds like an academic article to me. Oh, that's great. And we have a fun question also from Lynn. What are your favorites for composition, voices or instruments? Do you have a favorite?
Oh, wow. That is a wonderful question. Um, and I'm resisting the temptation to dodge. Um, uh, to be perfectly honest, I enjoy writing for voice better, but and here's the part where, okay, answer the question. Now here's the dodge. Um, one of the things that I feel very strongly about as a composer is that I have a responsibility to not be committed to anything. I need to be open to everything, whether that's a piano piece or a choral work, or Trevor comes and says, "Hey, Zach, I'd like you to write something for Cajon." This is my job, is to write music, and the form doesn't matter. People in other arts will tell you this too. If you're a writer, you can't limit yourself to, I only write fiction novels. It's like, no, you're going to write a magazine article, or you're going to write whatever it is. So I do my best to not limit myself and not be prejudiced and not develop favorites. But since, Lynn asked, yeah, I do. I kind of like writing for voice best. It's the truth.
Well, we're joined by yet another composer. I'm surrounded on all sides today. Professor Kurt Erickson in the house. How's it going, Kurt?
Hi, it's going good, Lisa. Thank you all for late arrival, but I had to jump in and say hi to Zach, excuse me, old man Z, and see how we're doing and offer my support here. How could I not?
Yeah.
It's great to
And
see
already
you.
just jumping in after a couple minutes, I'm agreeing with everything he said. Yes, yep, absolutely. Yes. I think that's one of the best things about this is how much we can learn from our guests and the people that we have on. And we're supposed to be here asking questions and starting conversations, but really like taking notes. Oh, wait, that's a great idea. Oh, I need to think about that again.
It's also really fun to have our colleagues in the studio too. Like Gabriel's done in the studio, and Armina and Zach, and folks I've gotten to know over time.
Yeah.
But then it turns out there are all these conversations we haven't had a chance to have.
Right.
And so, yeah, that it's really fun and really inspiring.
Agreed.
Yeah. So we've been talking about Zach's LoFi album. We did get a question earlier about the cover of the album. Maybe we could share that. I don't know if you can. I have it pulled up. Gabe, if you want me to share my screen.
I got it right here.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
We have a
he's
Zoom
pretty
full of
adorable,
cat
isn't
people.
he? So this little guy right here, his name is Frank, and I don't know. I don't know what I was thinking aside from the fact that I love my little dude here, and I'm gonna put him on the cover because why not? I'm not a big flashy person myself, and tend to be like you, Lisa. I like to hide away as much as I can, and not the type to really put my big fat face on an album cover. It's just I'm gonna hide over here. Listen to my music. That's why you're here. Don't look at me. But yeah, this is Frank the cat. Love him.
Now, is this a baby picture of Frank, or is this like a more sort of present day picture?
No. This is from when he was a kitten, and the timing, everything is all blurred together. He's about like 3 or 4 now, I think.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, we're gonna start a podcast, Kurt, if you want to be in on it. It's gonna be called Composers with Coffee Talking About Cats.
I'm all in on that.
Cool.
I think we already have 100 subscribers.
And we already have comments about starting a fan club for Frank.
Oh
That's
yeah.
the merchandise is going to start coming out of the t-shirts, the hats, right? The keychains. I mean, I'm very proud. I mean, we have this like for our, for our phones, the CRC music. Oh, Lisa has one too. Why not?
Yeah. Represent. Yeah, if
Wonderful.
anybody here wants a pop socket, I think
We
we
have
have
a lot.
more. We have a
We
lot.
have a lot. We have a lot. They're in a box, and we have a lot.
We bought them before the pandemic, and we're like, we're gonna give these out everywhere. And then the world was like,
Well, this has been a really interesting conversation so far. Darn, I wish I was able to jump on at 12. I hope it was this lively and interesting. I mean, we're talking about cats, we're talking about pop sockets. I mean,
oh yeah, lo-fi.
did you ask Zach? Has he talked about what he's working on now, or some future projects, or anything like that?
Yeah, what's the latest and greatest?
What's cooking?
We did a little bit at the beginning. I'm in progress on a new commission, which I'm really excited about, hoping for a performance next year. And it's a really, really cool piece. The performer is wanted something, he's a multi-instrumentalist. And so he wanted a piece very specifically that would allow him each movement to play a different instrument. And so that's going to be really cool. That's really, really fun. And I'm calling it a through line. And the through line, of course, is him, the performer. So that's a lot of fun. And then other projects in the works, always working on beats, always tinkering around with whatever I can come up with. So there's always something. You got to stay busy.
Yeah.
So Zach, I wanted to ask, and we have more music coming. But I guess it's what is your favorite part of the production process, or composer, then producing, then mixing, and then mastering? Do you have a favorite part on so many hats when you're producer, when you're the composer, and when you're mixing and mastering?
You're talking specifically about like a studio project?
Yeah, like for example, like this album, your lo-fi project.
Yeah, it's a tough one to answer because every piece in its own way can be so different and can be rewarding,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because like I've had projects where it was like pulling teeth to get the material written and I did not enjoy the composing aspect. But
Got
I've
it.
also had projects that it took me a year to mix it, which, oh my God, talk about tearing your hair out. That's why this. But like, so I don't know if I can really speak to it. Ironically, I think if I was forced to choose, I would pick the mixing because the music is in there and then it's about, okay, how do we make sure that it all gets heard? Blending everything correctly,
Yeah.
exploring the various sonic ways of expressing what it is, because like, and this varies from genre to genre, but like a song kind of has the music at the heart of it, and then there is the production, the way it's been produced. That's a layer on top of it, and then there's that mixing where you just bring the sonic possibilities to fruition. So I don't know. It's so tough to say because and you know this, of course, every project's different.
Yeah, every project's different, and it's very true. Sometimes you're frustrated with the composition. It's like I want to get over with the composition, and just do the rest, and the rest feels great. You're done with the writing, but sometimes the mix or the mastering is like I've heard it so many times, it sounds the same, or
Yes.
that you've tweaked it so many times that you're at a point you're like, ooh, I need to go a few steps back. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's those disastrous projects where you take it the whole way through and you go into mastering and the album tanks. It's like so.
Yeah. And Zach, do you have the same or a similar answer for, say, non-electronic music? So, like, say you're writing like acoustic or like a song or piano.
Yeah, for concert music, anything. Yeah, that's for me. It's a again. I feel like I love it all. I love everything, but it's so true because it's like the composition process where it's just pure creation and playing around with ideas. But then we get into the other side of it where I'm doing the engraving and making the music and making the actual scores, which it just tickles a whole other part of my brain, because then I get to indulge in all those little micro details to make sure it all looks exactly the way it should. And so there's rewards to every part of the process.
And this ties in so perfectly to a question that we just got from
I
one
know.
of you.
Yeah. That's
Do
a
you want to
very
go
good
ahead?
question.
Yeah, and maybe we can ask it to all three of you, since we have this composer flock, a flock of composers. So assuming that you're under no time limit for a project, when do you decide you're done?
Oh,
And there was like a collective like anxiety notch up in the Zoom room.
okay. So I heard a great quote once: "A project is never finished, it is only delivered." And we could sit here and talk about historically that, oh, now everybody's just all constantly reworking things, and George Lucas with the Star Wars films, but like, how many times did Mahler rewrite his symphonies? And it's, you're done when you have to be done. Sometimes you're able to get there and be like, oh, I think I can let it go. But like, my master's thesis was a 4-movement orchestral work. And I kid you not, I still bring it up almost every day. I'm tinkering around with the English horn part, So your mileage may vary, but that's kind of my experience. Gents, what do you think?
At least for me, I I just have to let it go at some point. Sometimes magically, it's finished and boom. But I know sometimes I just have to let it go. There's so many other projects I would like to be working on. Um, so yeah, you have to know when to let go.
I think there's levels of done. The easiest one is when the deadline is there and you have to
Yes.
send it out. Then I'm done with the deadline. And then there's the, okay, now that I've actually heard it or I've heard it rehearsed, well, I know it's done, but I still need to edit and tweak it. And then there's that 2, 3 years later, okay, now I grew, I learned a couple things about this or orchestration or whatever it is. Maybe I can come back and make it cleaner. So levels of done, I'd say.
Yeah.
Levels of done, like cooking a steak. Levels. I have another great question also too in the chat. This is from Nisenya, asks, and this is another great question for everyone. Also adds, I'm a Frank fan for sure, especially when he cameos for his fans during class. So if you could all go back in time, we can start with you, Zach. If you could go back in time, what advice would you give young man Z? Or what sort of advice would you have for a younger version of yourself, but then also, kind of thinking about it a little bit more broadly in terms of what advice would you have for students who are aspiring composers and to make composition their career?
Yeah. Well, you tacked one on at the end there. So something that I understood much later in life than I wished, was the importance of building up relationships with the people around you. And when you're a student, that means primarily your other students, and there's the temptation to think, oh, we're just a bunch of friends hanging out. It's like, no, no, no. These are the people who are going to be your colleagues throughout your life, And I wish that somebody had explained to me way back when I was doing my bachelor's degree that process was happening. And I wasn't aware of it at the time. And as a result, we could talk about lost opportunities or what have you, but it's like, be cognizant is what I would say to a younger version of myself. Be intentional, if you can, which is a hard thing, because especially if you're a student and maybe you're taking 80 billion units and you have to get your practice in and then you have your other activities, it's very hard to maintain that higher level of functioning that allows you to be intentional about what you're doing. But just know that these people who are your friends, they're not going to just be your friends. These will be the people that you work with throughout your musical career.
Yes, yes, and yes.
That's a great point. Those are great points. I'll go next and say that I think we all have strengths and weaknesses and sort of the Achilles heel that we kind of need to work on. I see composition. There's the creativity part and there's the craftsmanship part. And so for me personally, if I was to go back in time, I focused a lot on the creativity part. And if I could go back in time, I would give myself a little nudge and say, focus on the craftsmanship part as well, because you can come up with really great ideas, and that's really important and super creative. But you have to be able to articulate them and write them down and see them through. I think they're both important because you can articulate an idea, but if it's not a great idea, it's kind of all for naught a little bit. So I think for myself, I would kind of make that suggestion to work on the craftsmanship part.
Yeah.
Gabriel, what about you?
Well, all that you both said, but I would add, keep practicing your instrument, maybe learn another instrument, and try to learn some conducting.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Especially the conducting part, because there have been times I've been conducting my own pieces, and while I'm doing it, it's like, I wish I was better at this. The piece deserves somebody better doing this. So having at least a basic, and with a lot of undergrads, usually composers will take some either choral or orchestral conducting. Take it, and try to learn it. And try to use it too. I mean, it's one of those things. If you don't conduct, you're gonna forget all the the patterns, which I already did. But that's my 10 cents there.
Yeah, get a job teaching. Conduct one of the choirs at your local church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say too that a lot of this advice also applies to folks who are interested in music, but maybe composition isn't their main thing. And sort of, I found it also to be true in my studies that, my friends and my classmates are now my colleagues. And those relationships were so important, not only now because, we support each other and contribute to each other's projects, but also because the road is long and difficult to, making music as a career. And I'll just speak for myself, there were a lot of times I wanted to quit and give up. And it was my friends who helped me get through, right? Who gave me that encouragement when I really needed it, who told me the things I needed to hear, whether it was easy or hard to hear them. And so, yeah, definitely be intentional, as you said, Zach, about supporting and nurturing those friendships, and, listening to and supporting your colleagues. And also, this is to riff off something that Professor Mari Tao said once, which was, go to people's things, like show up.
Yes. Oh my God, yes.
Yeah, go to their performances, go to their concerts, like be present.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. It's so true.
Yeah.
I feel like this could be a seminar class. How to make a life in music.
Yeah. Step 1, adopt a cat.
True. It's all true.
Maybe we could listen to another one of your pieces, Zach, since we have you here. Is there, and when we could talk about it, is there one in particular that you'd like to share with us today?
Yeah, Gabriel, dial in the Round Midnight cover.
That's the next one I have in queue. That's perfect.
Perfect.
Okay.
spending, Batman.
Has such cool effects. I love it.
Yeah, so that particular effect is a simulation of what happens on an old reel-to-reel tape machine as the motors begin to fray. The consistency of the speed that the tape plays will vary. And so again, just as I did with, adding vinyl pop and hiss and scratch and stuff like that, I have a tape machine simulator, which I could then pump the sample through and degrade accordingly.
Nice.
So that song is, of course, a cover of the Thelonious Monk track "Round Midnight." And if you are at all familiar with jazz and jazz pianists, you're going to know this wonderful, wonderful standard. And I love Monk. He is just, hands down my favorite. And I was coming up with this, and at first I called the song "Drunk Monk." And then I worked with the distributors, the people who were going to be putting the record out, and they're like, "Dude, it's way too close. You're never going to pass muster." I'm like, "Fine, it's a cover, fine." But in a way, I like it better like that, because then I get to honor that tradition, because, well, and maybe I shouldn't say too much here, Lisa, but like hip hop, like so many popular music forms, are descended from jazz,
Yeah. Or yeah, they share kind of the same ancestors in these toasting traditions, and borrowing of melodies and changing them to suit a particular purpose. And what I also thought was cool about this cover was that well, that pitch sound blew my mind. But also, I mean, it is recognizably Round Midnight, but you would never hear this and think that it's exactly what you would expect from a cover. It also, yeah, has so much originality to it. And it goes way beyond a sample, right? Because a sample, sometimes you just take a little snippet, maybe you change an aspect of it, but it's pretty recognizable. And here it's longer than that. I mean, it's longer than a sample, but there's also more going on there.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And a cool bass part too.
Yeah.
It was such a fun record to make.
Yeah, and I really like the idea of honoring the people that sort of came before us and that inspire us, because it's a recognition of how much they mean to us, and have sort of crafted our own musical views. So it's I'm a huge Monk fan too. So to hear you say that, that's really cool.
Very cool. So we still have well, oh gosh, time is flying by so fast.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that, well, there are two things that I kind of want to talk about while we still have time, if it's okay with you all. I'm not trying to be the dictator of our conversation. Well, I definitely want to make sure that while folks are still here, and before maybe if people have to sign off because this is their lunch hour, Zach, where can people go buy your album and listen to your music and join the Frank fan club?
The Bandcamp site actually is the place to go, and I see Gabriel hard at work, and there it is.
Well, you heard all the
right in
clickings.
there. Hey, we all teach over Zoom. We know what the clicking sound means.
Business.
But yeah, you can, that is the great place to start, and you can get the album digitally. You can get it on vinyl. I have Frank t-shirts. So so for those who are curious,
take my money. One
yeah,
other
you
thing
can absolutely get it on vinyl, Selena.
So cool. One other thing I wanted to touch on while we still have time is, we kind of talked this a little bit before we started the Zoom, but music engraving and what that is, what that means, and kind of your involvement with this art form.
I appreciate you saying it like that, because this is one of the things that is becoming a bit of a lost art, as, oh boy, I have, let where to begin? So when I was an undergrad, I got a compliment that my score was very well done. And for a lot of performers and composers, this is sometimes a problem where we prepare our materials. It goes back to what was said earlier about you can have the greatest idea, but if you can't express it well on the page, doesn't matter. And I got a compliment about how nice my scores were, and that kind of sent me down the rabbit hole of trying to create better and better and better scores. And this led me to music engraving, which is the formal process of preparing scores for publication.
Mm.
And it is a long tradition. This goes back hundreds of years to back when, they would literally engrave into the lead plates, the notes and the notation, and then, print from that. And these days, we've got so many great software tools. I'm a Finale user myself. Sibelius is a wonderful program. We had a great Dorco. No, what was the demonstration that Armando did?
MuseScore.
MuseScore. Thank you.
Yeah.
Dorco's another one that's out there. We have all of these wonderful tools now, but unfortunately, the expertise of how to make things professional is kind of falling off because we just type the music into the computer now and we print it out. And so I love getting really, really deep into all the minutia of what really goes into a score, measuring everything out with that precision of, okay, my basic unit here is the space between two lines on a staff. And everything about how music is laid out on the page flows out from that, and all the many rules associated with all that minutia of how things get positioned and how things get spaced and where stuff lays out. And if you are a details person at all, there is all kinds of depths to explore here. We were talking before we got started here about Elaine Gould's book, Behind Bars, which is a phenomenal doorstopper tome. Gould was the head of new music publishing at Faber for a while, and actually a long while. And I mean, really, really, really knows her stuff. So yeah, I could do an entire seminar on just engraving. It's so fascinating because what is it's like name is falling out of my head, but think of like the painters who paint by making little dots. It's that kind of a process, and then you back away, and then all you're left with is just this overall artistic impression that just tickles my senses of order and flow in all kinds of good ways.
Yeah, and I'm just going to jump in and say that Zach is really, really, really good at this, and it makes a huge difference. And I think as artists, as musicians, there's so many steps that go into creating work and disseminating work and the ideas portion. But as we're creating scores that people are reading from, you really want these to sort of mirror the artistry and the time that you put in as a composer, because if it doesn't, there's a mismatch there, and people aren't gonna connect to that. And ultimately, we want this to be as inviting as possible, and I think that we can't overstate the importance, and also to talk about the fact for people who are pursuing a music career, to realize that there are so many different aspects to monetizing your career and making a living. And sometimes we're going to find that we have very specific skill sets, which can be very helpful and very useful, and that are a great part of kind of our collective musical lineage. And so there might be some people hearing this for the first time going, I have some graphic design skills. This always has a sort of appealed to me. This might be something that you want to kind of take a second look at and pursue, because there's, like I said, it's a really wonderful skill set, and Zach in particular really has these. I mean, it's the work that he does is just truly amazing.
It's so gracious. Thank you.
Me tipping my hat to you. My hat with a frank on the But yeah, so speak to that a little bit. So what were some of the steps, the processes that you went through when you kind of decided, yeah, this is something where I can kind of help people out. I can sort of make a sort of like a side business from this. What did that look like, or what did that entail?
Well, the side business thing came from mostly just word of mouth. As I worked with composers and did work for them, they would recommend me to others. Um, and then the learning engraving took a lot of shelving the ego. It's this, just like it is with any learning process. Step one is admitting you don't know. And so I had to go into the
Hmm.
spaces of people who did know. And so it's forums and online groups and working with people who were in publishing, and listening to what they had to say, and then being brave enough to ask questions about, well, I think it should be this, why isn't it like that? And then you brace your ego for the bruising that they give you because you're a young upstart who doesn't know anything, and then you pay attention and you listen, because the real answer is coming afterwards. So it was just a lot of, and I don't want to say being willing to learn, because I wanted to know. This was just something I am still obsessed with. My copy of Behind Bars has like 24 different little plastic tabs hanging out of it. But there are multiple textbooks out there, and there are multiple groups, and just got to have that willingness to dive deep.
Mm.
Hmm.
Maybe you can tell us a little bit about, because there was a question in the chat, if you ever teach an engraving class. Let's put that in our ideal list. But also maybe you can tell us a bit, Zach, about the classes that you do teach at CRC, and kind of, what are some of the topics you cover? I know we have some of your students here today. Thank you all so much for joining us. But yeah, tell us about your classes. Where can students go to learn all the knowledge that you have?
Well, I teach the first year musicianship sequence, and it's so good to see you all here. I really appreciate the support. It's awesome. And I love that class because it's one of the core music subjects, and it's so absolutely crucial. Anybody who is interested in not just our degree programs, not just doing a transfer, if anybody wants to have a career in music, you must pass through this door. It's fundamental skills that are absolutely crucial to any kind of music education. And so to be there to get people started on what is actually an extremely challenging, difficult subject, and to give them the support that they need, and to reassure them that we're moving beyond talent. This is about your ability to practice. This is about your ability to build a skill set. And yes, you absolutely can. And we're going to do it block by block by block. So I love teaching musicianship. Um, I'm also teaching the recording classes right now, which is so much fun, teaching folks how to use Pro Tools. Um, and that's, I get another creative thing, because maybe you teach composition, music comes in that way, but there's something about the creativity of a studio process that's different. And so teaching people those skills, I've taught jazz history, taught group piano, and I can never get enough.
That's awesome. Well, does anybody else have any final questions or anything else to add? I want to be cognizant of everybody's time. I know it's Friday afternoon, and we have sunshine to go absorb. Yeah.
Can I share your website to
Yes.
our
Oh, yes.
guests? I mean, and I'm gonna share like the videos, performance videos of the other parts, so more on your instrumental music, so
Yes. Thank you.
our audience can hear a different part of your musical creative process, and in a different, especially like right now for voice, for piano.
There's some wonderful performances on there. I have been so fortunate to work with such amazing, incredible performers, and anytime I'm able to shine a light on them, it's just, yeah. Especially the one that Angela Young, I think it's even the top video up there,
It is,
and
yeah.
she put together this incredible rendition of the aria from my No Exit opera, and we did it think it was played at the part of the Phenom recital last fall, and it's just. And she is a whole artist unto herself. I mean, you want to talk about having additional production skills. I mean, she does some amazing things with non-traditional performance that we've had to learn how to do working in this virtual space. So definitely check that out.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Zach. It was a lot of fun. It's always really cool to, get to know our colleagues better, and to have a chance to talk about the things that make us excited and geek out about music. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come join us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and I love talking with all of you, and it's been so great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you to Gabriel and to Kurt for being here today too. Thank you to all of our wonderful attendees. Really appreciated your conversation in the chat and your questions. Folks who are watching this later on YouTube, thank you as well. We really appreciate it. If you liked what you heard today, please make sure to check out Zach's websites. Also consider taking one of his classes. There's no better way to get those skills. Thank you again so much.
You bet. Thank you. Thank you, Zach.
Thank you, Zach.
Lisa and Gabriel, thank you.
All right. See you all next week back in the studio. Bye, everybody.